It's New Year's Day and our sixth wedding anniversary. For the first time, our family of four is visiting my husband Kevin's parents. It all started with just one word from Kevin. I want to settle things. I want you to come with me. Kevin, who usually wears a smile, had an unusually serious expression, likely due to nervousness. Of course, let's handle it properly, I said, consciously putting on a smile to help Kevin relax. Seeing me like that, Kevin smiled gently. Kevin's nervousness about returning to his hometown stemmed from the fact that this wouldn't be the usual Christmas scene. Normally, we would exchange Christmas gifts, our children would receive many presents, and as a couple, we would give many gifts to our relatives' children. But we knew that this year would be different because of Kevin's parents. It was evident that they were treating us terribly, and such mistreatment would likely be directed not only at us, but also at our two children. Thinking about it made my heart ache. Even so, someday we would have to face this situation. In that case, I decided to follow Kevin's lead. Kevin and I work as construction workers for the same company. I joined the company after graduating from middle school because I wanted to lessen the burden on my mom, who raised me and my two siblings by herself. Since I was in the 4th grade, I knew I wanted to help her as soon as possible. Even though girls don't usually work in the field, my mom, who I thought only worked as an office worker at the civil engineering company, was surprised when she learned I would be working as a laborer. She widened her eyes and said, "Sitting still at a desk and working is impossible for me. Going outside is much more enjoyable." Despite her concerns, I argued with the CEO about working in the field because the salary was good. My mom knew that once I made up my mind, I wouldn't listen to anyone, so she didn't say anything more. On my first day at the company, when I was called by the site supervisor and stood in front of the workers, everyone was taken aback. It's not every day you see a girl fresh out of middle school working alongside burly men. Sensing the atmosphere, I said, "My name is Mary. Feel free to train me rigorously. No need for any special treatment." Everyone had a bewildered expression on their faces, like pigeons that had just eaten a pea shooter. It was a moment of realization for me. One man let out an incredibly loud shout, "Kevin, you've only been here for a month, so you shouldn't be saying that then." The room filled with laughter, and it became the signal to start the day's work. Although I had asked not to be treated specially, all the workers were kind and helped me get used to the work quickly. One person who especially looked out for me was Kevin, who had raised his voice on my first day, saying, "Leave it to me." Kevin, who is 3 years older than me, served as the site's mood maker. During busy times when tensions ran high, he always helped lighten the mood. He patiently taught me the basics of the job and always lent a hand during physically demanding tasks. I gradually found myself drawn to Kevin, who never neglected the people around him and always showed consideration. About half a year into my job, one day Kevin was tasked with moving materials, and I ended up riding in the same vehicle with him. I had started to become curious about Kevin and felt excited throughout the entire car ride, unable to say anything. An awkward atmosphere filled the car. "Why did you join this company, Kevin?" Feeling the need to say something, I asked a trivial question. At that moment, Kevin decided to share something personal. "I wanted to become free sooner, you know." I was taken aback by the sudden heavy statement. "I'm sorry," I said, thinking I had asked something I shouldn't have. Kevin quickly returned to his usual cheerful self and said, "Mary, there's no reason for you to have such a gloomy expression. I'm confident that my judgment was correct." Hearing those words, I felt a deep admiration for Kevin. In the next moment, my true feelings slipped out. "Would you like to go out with me?" I didn't even know why those words came out of my mouth. Suddenly feeling embarrassed, I looked down. "Nice to see you," Kevin said when the car stopped at a red light. I lifted my head and looked at Kevin. He directed a kind gaze towards me. Shortly after we started dating, I learned the meaning of what Kevin had said in the car on the day of the material delivery. When he mentioned wanting to be free as soon as possible, I discovered that Kevin had a 2-year age difference with his brother Sam. Sam had been academically excellent since childhood with outstanding school grades. On the other hand, Kevin didn't have good grades, although they were still above average. But his parents didn't accept that. Kevin explained that he always felt uncomfortable being compared to Sam. That alone was difficult enough. But Kevin's parents poured all their love into Sam. Sam went to one of the top public middle schools in the county, while Kevin attended the local public middle school. During that time, all of their parents' attention seemed to be focused on Sam, leaving Kevin without any communication or support. When Kevin entered high school, he began thinking about moving away from his parents once he graduated. The day after his high school graduation, Kevin left home without revealing his destination. "I'm leaving this house starting tomorrow," Kevin said during dinner. His mother simply replied, "Is that so?" while his father remained silent. Sam, Kevin's brother, wasn't there because he had entered an extremely competitive public university. "We got married when I was 20 and Kevin was 24. We invited my family, colleagues from work, and close friends to the wedding. At Kevin's request, we didn't inform his family. I want to be genuinely blessed from the bottom of my heart," Kevin had said, and I understood that it was his true feeling, not just a show of strength. So I didn't argue. The following year, our first son Jack was born, and in the third year of our marriage, our daughter Sarah was born. We were never wealthy, but being part of a smiling family made me happy. As far as I knew, Kevin was not in contact with his family at all. However, Kevin said that he would return to his parents' house next New Year. "Just be yourself," he said, but I knew it wouldn't be easy to act normally. I wondered what kind of expression I'd see from Kevin's parents and how Kevin would interact with them and Sam. Would he have to endure painful experiences like he did in high school again? I spent anxious days thinking about various things until we went back to his hometown. For Kevin, it had been 6 years since he last visited his home. Waiting to greet us were 2 children. "Mom, Dad, who are these people?" the older boy asked before running into the house. After a while, a woman with a neat appearance, around 50 years old with long hair, appeared. This was likely Kevin's mother. "Long time no see," Kevin greeted her. "It's been a while," she responded coldly. Her attitude made it clear that we were not welcomed. In the living room, Kevin's father and Sam's spouse were there. The conversation flowed fairly well, but it revolved around matters related to Sam, who worked at a city bank, his children's extracurricular activities, and their upcoming exams. It was a clear attempt to provoke us. Our 2 kids stuck close to my side, sensing the tension. Kevin's mother reappeared in the living room with a cheerful smile and handed a small envelope to Sam's children. Their faces lit up with joy, showing how much she doted on them. Then she turned her gaze towards us and said, "We will not give any New Year's gift to the children of a high school dropout's wife." Her words stung deeply. I clenched my fist firmly on my thigh, enduring it. Kevin had told me to endure whatever they said, and I was determined to follow his advice. My 2 children were also enduring in the same way. There was a brief moment of silence. Then Kevin spoke, "It's not a big deal. Meeting with you guys for the last time this year, we won't see each other again after this." His words were heavy, yet he spoke in a bright tone. They must have been surprised by Kevin's reaction. I had never expected this reaction. Kevin's parents and Sam just said, "Huh," and then froze. "Mary, is it about time for the CEO to arrive?" Kevin asked me. The clock read almost 5 minutes to 11. "Yeah, that's right. They said they'd arrive around 11, I replied. During our conversation, Kevin's parents listened with blank expressions. Around 11:10, the doorbell rang. Kevin's mother answered it, and a voice said, "I'm Smith." With a curious expression, Kevin's mother headed towards the entrance. When she came back, she had a complex expression. Behind her was the CEO of our company, standing with a calm demeanor. "I'm sorry for the unexpected visit during the New Year holiday," the CEO began. "Kevin from my family said today would be a good day to talk." Kevin's parents and Sam had expressions of confusion. "Mr. Smith, we finished our discussion. I'll take on the matter of adoption," Kevin spoke clearly, ensuring his parents and Sam understood. The sudden mention of adoption left Kevin's parents even more taken aback. "Did you really explain the situation properly? You have a habit of making judgments based on your own assumptions from time to time," the CEO said, demonstrating his understanding of Kevin's personality. "My parents have been talking as if we weren't there at all. Their attitude clearly indicates how they feel about us," Kevin said. The CEO turned to Kevin's parents, straightened his posture, and said, "I am considering adopting Kevin, and I have his consent for it. However, I believe it's essential to have a proper discussion with both of you. That's why I came to pay my respects today." While the CEO explained, Kevin's parents and Sam remained silent. They probably couldn't say anything because they were hearing about how great a person Kevin is and how dedicated he is in everything he does. The CEO had broached the topic of adoption about 6 months ago. He and his wife didn't have any children and wanted Kevin to eventually take over the company. "I'm not cut out for that," Kevin initially declined, But the CEO smiled and said, "Can you really say something like that? Everyone except you supported the idea of adopting Kevin into the family." Upon hearing those words, Kevin broke down in tears. When I realized how many people truly saw and accepted him, I felt incredibly blessed. When the CEO told me about Kevin's adoption proposal, Kevin, sitting next to me, explained it with a hint of embarrassment. Kevin gave us an experience as if he were our own child. He fulfilled the dream of walking down the aisle with a bride's hand I thought would never be mine, the CEO said, looking at me. He was probably referring to how he went with me to Kevin's place instead of my father at our wedding. Even after the CEO's explanation about the adoption, Kevin's parents said nothing. "Goodbye," Kevin said, likely a final farewell to his parents and Sam. "I beg your pardon," the CEO added. We got up and headed to the front door. For some reason, everyone saw us off. Kevin's parents and Sam both had faces like they couldn't accept reality, as if they had been caught by a fox. "Wow, that's a cool car," Sam's children exclaimed in amazement as they saw the CEO's car. Our family got into the car, and I rolled down the window to give a nod. Kevin's parents and Sam's group had blank, ashen faces. As the car started moving, Kevin said, "Dad, I'm counting on you from now on." "I'd appreciate you," I added. Then our two children, though a bit hesitant, spoke in clear voices, "Grandpa, I'm counting on you."
The girl cried every night after the maid went to sleep. One day the maid pretended to be asleep. When she heard what the girl's father did at night, she was terrified. The shiny black car stopped smoothly in front of the large door of the Moore mansion. Charles Moore, always impeccable in his business suit, got out first, walking around the vehicle to open the door for his daughter Susan, who carried the weight of another long day in her eyes. "Come on, Susan, we don't have all the time in the world. Tomorrow we have another rehearsal and you need to be at your best as a model," Charles said, with a tone that mixed urgency and a distorted sense of paternal concern. Susan, dragging her feet, barely had time to respond before being greeted by Helen at the mansion's entrance. The maid opened her arms, enveloping the girl in a hug that seemed to say everything words couldn't. "Oh, my dear, you look so tired today. Come, I'll prepare something special for you to eat. Something to make you feel better, yes?" Helen's voice was a refuge, filled with a warmth and affection that Susan rarely found elsewhere. Charles watched the interaction from a distance, his sharp eyes capturing every detail. "Helen, remember that Susan is on a strict diet. No deviations today. She needs to maintain her shape for the judges. It's for her own good," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Charles's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Susan, still in Helen's arms, whispered, her voice almost lost among the echoes of the grand entrance. "I just wish things were different, Helen. I wish I could choose, choose my life, my dreams, choose to be with Mom." Susan's words were filled with a deep longing for a different life, far from the expectations and pressures imposed by her father. Helen, guiding Susan to the kitchen, whispered back, her words tinged with gentle yet firm wisdom. "I know, my dear, I know. But remember, the darkest night is just before dawn. You have a strong spirit, Susan, a spirit that no stage or judge can truly imprison. We're in this together. You're not alone." Helen's words not only offered comfort but wove a silent promise, a vow of loyalty and protection. Meanwhile, Charles Moore remained still, watching the interaction between his daughter and the maid. His thoughts were a labyrinth of expectations and pressures, a reflection of his own unrealized dreams, and his determination to see Susan succeed in the modeling career he so wanted for her. "She'll thank me one day when she's on top, when she's somebody. All this will be just a distant memory, a small price to pay for greatness," Charles thought, convincing himself that the path he had chosen for Susan was the only possible one. The kitchen became a refuge, a small world apart where Helen and Susan could talk and dream away from Charles's judging eyes. "Now, let's find something you can eat, something that won't make your father frown at us but will still bring a smile to your face," Helen said, as she rummaged through the cupboards for something that met these specific criteria. "You know, Helen, sometimes when I'm out there on stage parading under all those lights, I feel like I'm more distant from myself than ever. It's as if every step, every smile is just part of something I never decided to pursue," Susan confessed, while helping Helen prepare a simple yet nutritious salad. Helen looked at Susan, her eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and firmness. "Susan, my dear, never forget who you are. No matter how many stages you walk or how many dazzling dresses you wear, your essence, your true self, is much more than any title they might give you. And remember, I'll always be here to remind you of that, always. The conversation between the two was a stark contrast to the loneliness and silence that dominated the rest of the mansion. For a brief moment, the kitchen was filled with laughter and shared dreams, a haven of human warmth amidst the cold ambition of Charles. At the end of the night, as Susan climbed the stairs to her room, a feeling of gratitude warmed her heart. "Thank you, Helen, for everything," she murmured, almost silently, but with enough certainty for the words to reach the maid who was cleaning the kitchen. "Good night, Susan. Dream with the angels," Helen replied with a smile that carried the promise of better days. This simple exchange of words was routine, like a reminder of the unbreakable bond that united them, a silent strength that somehow promised to defy the storms to come. After the warm farewell with Helen, Susan climbed the stairs, each step echoing the loneliness she felt. Upon reaching her room, she closed the door slowly, leaning against it with a deep sigh. "Why is it so hard to accept the life of a model?" she thought, letting herself fall onto the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of the world on her young shoulders. "I just want to be understood. I just want Dad to see that these contests and fashion shows are destroying me inside. They are not my happiness, they are my prison." In the silence of her room, surrounded by her trophies and sashes that were supposed to represent achievements, Susan felt more distant from herself than ever. Helen understands. She always understands, but she's the only one. If only Mom were here, things would be different. She would get me out of this prison. Susan's words were lost in the vast emptiness of the mansion. Meanwhile, in her modest room, Helen was preparing for bed, but her thoughts were with Susan. That girl has so much potential, so much brightness, that is stifled every day. Charles doesn't see or doesn't want to see. Susan needs freedom, space to be herself, not the version they want her to be. Even in the darkness of her room, Helen felt a growing determination, a silent promise to do more to help Susan find her way. The night wore on, and the mansion seemed to wrap itself in a shroud of silence. But in the quiet, the muffled sound of Susan's crying in her room seeped through the corridors, a sad melody breaking the silence. In her room, Helen tossed and turned, the distant sounds disturbing her sleep. "They're just dreams," she tried to convince herself. "Just sad dreams reflecting my own fears and worries about Susan. She's fine." But deep down, a part of her knew that those cries were real, echoes of a reality she wished she could change. At dawn, the soft light of the sun began to bathe the mansion's corridors, bringing with it a new day, but the echoes of the previous night remained. Helen was the first to rise, as always, her movements careful and quiet as she prepared breakfast. Susan, in turn, woke up with the first rays of the sun, the traces of tears still visible on her face. Getting up, she walked to the mirror, facing her reflection. "Today is a new day," she told herself, trying to put a strength into her words that she didn't feel. "I need to be strong. For myself, for Mom, and even for Helen, who believes in me more than I do." Susan descended the stairs, drawn by the inviting aroma coming from the kitchen. Her walk, still marked by the hesitation of the sleepless night, softened as she spotted Helen. "Good morning, Helen. It looks like you've already started working your magic here," said Susan, a slight smile appearing on her lips as she felt the welcoming atmosphere that the maid always managed to create. Helen turned to Susan, returning the smile with an even warmer one. "Good morning, dear. Today I thought of making something special for breakfast, something to remind us that Saturdays are for relaxing and recharging our energies. How about pancakes with honey and fresh fruit?" Helen's proposal was not just an offer of food, but a gesture of affection, an attempt to bring some lightness to Susan's often rigid routine. Susan sat at the kitchen table, watching Helen move skillfully. "You always know how to make the days better, Helen. I really appreciate it, you know." Susan's words carried a weight, a deep sincerity that went beyond the routine air of the moment. It was a confession of gratitude, an acknowledgement of the light that Helen brought into her life. As the two shared breakfast, the conversation flowed naturally, covering everything from the simplest weekend plans to the deepest dreams and desires. Helen listened attentively, always encouraging Susan to open up, to express those parts of herself that were so often repressed by her father's demands. The clock struck noon when Charles Moore joined them for lunch. The light atmosphere that surrounded Susan and Helen subtly changed, the air carrying an almost palpable tension with the presence of the family's patriarch. Helen, noticing the change, remained alert, ready to smooth things over if necessary. During the meal, the conversation revolved around trivialities until Susan, encouraged by the proximity and support of Helen, touched on a delicate subject. "Dad, I was thinking about Mom. Could we visit her soon? I really miss her," said Susan, her voice trembling but determined, seeking to open a space for the long-avoided dialogue. Charles Moore, grabbing a napkin with more force than necessary, responded with a tone that brooked no argument. "Susan, we've discussed this. It's not appropriate to bring your mother into this conversation. You have everything you need here. Focusing on her only distracts you from what's really important." His statement was final, cutting off any hope of a more open dialogue on the subject. Helen, standing by, felt her heart tighten at the sight of Susan's expression. The girl lowered her head, accepting the reprimand in silence. The maid wished to intervene, wished to defend Susan and remind Charles of the importance of maternal love, of the connection that should not be ignored or underestimated. However, she knew well the rules of the mansion and the place she occupied within it. After the tense silence that followed the mention of her mother, Charles Moore seized the opportunity to steer the conversation back to more familiar ground: Susan's obligations and expectations. With a look that swept the table like a general assessing his troops, he fixed his gaze on Susan with calculated intensity. "As for your schedule today, we have a long list of preparatory tasks for the next fashion show. And remember, Susan, it's essential that we review your eating habits and personal care routine. You're eating too much again and your hair is visibly dry. We need to maintain an impeccable image at all times," he said, mixing concern with a sense of duty. Susan, feeling the weight of each word like stones in her pockets, lowered her gaze to her plate, now without appetite. In her mind, a storm of responses formed, each one clamoring to be said. However, the reality of her situation and the desire to avoid conflict with her father made her choose the path of submission. "Understood, Dad. I'll try harder," she murmured, her voice barely rising above a whisper, a demonstration of obedience that barely concealed her desire for freedom and authenticity. Helen, a silent witness to this conversation, felt a mix of indignation and helplessness. In her heart, a flame of rebellion burned, a fervent desire to protect Susan from the incessant cycle of criticism and unreasonable expectations. How does he not see? How does he not see what he's doing to her? Helen thought, her mind racing with concern and care. Susan is so bright, so full of life, and he only sees flaws where he should see virtues. But what can I do? How can I help her see her own light? The meal ended in a disheartened atmosphere, each family member lost in their own thoughts and worries. Charles was the first to rise, immersed in his plans and schedules, leaving behind a trail of unspoken expectations as he headed toward the living room. After Charles left, Helen approached Susan, who still seemed lost in her thoughts. With gentleness, the maid sat down beside the young girl, preparing to address a topic she knew was sensitive. "Susan, when you mentioned your mother today, I saw something in your eyes. Something that tells me this is more than just missing her. Your mother, Dorothy. She must be very special to you, isn't she?" Helen said, initiating a conversation she knew was necessary, a gesture of concern and affection. Susan looked at Helen, a mix of surprise and relief in her eyes for having someone to share her feelings with. "Yes, Helen, she is. I think about her every day, but my father doesn't like to talk about her, as you saw. After they separated, he said it was better for me to stay with him, that he had the resources and knowledge to give me a better future," Susan confessed, the words flowing more easily than she expected, fueled by the safety Helen provided. Helen nodded, absorbing every word with empathy. "I understand, dear. It's a complicated situation. But tell me, how did your mother Dorothy feel about this? About you staying with your father?" Helen's question was not just out of curiosity. She sought to understand the situation completely, perhaps to find a way to help the young girl deal with her feelings and maybe even find a solution to the rift that seemed to separate mother and daughter. Susan sighed, a visible weight on her shoulders as she recalled those moments. "My mother, she was heartbroken, Helen, but at the time she didn't have much choice. My father was right in a way. He had more money and my mother was just starting to get back on her feet after the separation. She told me it was temporary, that we would be together again soon. But that never happened since I was 6 years old." Susan's words were laden with deep sadness, revealing the pain of an unfulfilled promise, a hope that had faded over time. Helen gently took Susan's hand, offering silent comfort. "Susan, your mother loves you, of that I have no doubt. And maybe there's still a way for you two to reclaim that lost time. Life is full of surprises and love finds a way. Maybe it's time we start thinking about how we can make that reunion happen." Helen's words were more than comfort. They were a pledge of support, a promise that she would stand by Susan, helping her find the path back to Dorothy's arms. The conversation between Helen and Susan continued, each word weaving a thread of hope into the young girl's heart. At that moment, more than ever, Susan felt she was not alone on her journey, and with Helen by her side, perhaps, just perhaps, she could find her way back to the mother she loved so much. After an intense and emotional conversation, it was time for Susan to prepare to accompany Charles in the planned activities for the rest of the day. Helen watched as Susan gathered her things, the girl's expression a mix of resignation and determination. "Helen, thank you for everything. I don't even know how I'm going to—" "Well, just thank you," Susan said, stumbling over her words. The weight of her gratitude so great it seemed difficult to express it fully. Helen smiled, nodding. "You never need to thank me, dear. Remember, I'm here for whatever you need. And let's think about what we talked about, okay? Everything will work out, you'll see," Helen replied, trying to infuse each word with optimism, though her heart ached to see Susan leave. Charles called from outside, his voice interrupting their brief moment together. "Susan, we're late, let's go!" With a final shared look, Susan turned, heading toward her father's voice, leaving Helen alone in the room, wrapped in her thoughts. As soon as the door closed behind Susan and Charles, Helen turned her attention to the house. There was much to do, and although her hands were busy, her mind was elsewhere. As she cleaned and organized, Helen began to form light plans, subtle ways to improve Susan's life within the limitations they faced. "Maybe I can find a way for Susan to spend more time in the garden. She always seems happier out there, away from the pressures," Helen mused aloud, wiping the dining room table. But then, doubt crept in, like a shadow over her optimism. But what about Charles? He would certainly find a way to see it as a distraction. No, that wouldn't be enough. The next idea came while she was folding Susan's clothes, a routine gesture that now carried new weight. What if I tried talking to Charles, explaining how much Susan needs a little more freedom, maybe even suggesting that she could visit Dorothy? The idea seemed promising for a moment, but soon Helen shook her head, frustrated. "Who am I to him? Just a maid. He would never listen to me, especially not about how to raise his own daughter." Helen continued her chores, but each task was accompanied by a potential plan, and inevitably the doubts that followed. What if I started small? Subtle changes, maybe convincing Charles to let Susan choose her own clothes for the fashion shows, something that would make her feel like she has some control over her life. But again, reality imposed itself. He would probably say I don't understand anything about the world of fashion competitions, and he wouldn't be entirely wrong. At one point, Helen was in Mr. Moore's office and came across some documents. However, what stood out most to her was one that had some important information. She picked up the document, read it, and discovered it contained Dorothy's address, Susan's mother. "I'll take paper and pen and write this down. I might need it someday." Thinking far ahead, Helen wrote down Dorothy's supposed address on a piece of paper and tucked it into her pants. At the end of the day, Helen sat in the kitchen, a cup of tea in her hands, contemplating the quiet of the now empty house. Each plan she had formed seemed so fragile in the face of the situation's reality, so full of potential failures and obstacles that made her question if there was anything at all, she could actually do to help. Am I just deluding myself? Helen wondered, the sense of helplessness growing. Maybe there's no way to change things. Maybe I'm just placing hopes where there are no solutions. And yet, despite the doubts and uncertainty, Helen knew she couldn't give up. For Susan, she would try. Even if each plan seemed doomed to fail, the alternative was something Helen simply couldn't accept. After the serene farewell, Helen felt the heavy atmosphere settling over the mansion. In her mind echoed the crying she had thought was a dream the night before. What if it wasn't a dream? What if Susan really needs me and I'm just convincing myself it's my imagination? Helen pondered, feeling a responsibility that surpassed her routine duties. She decided then not to succumb to sleep so easily that night. As the house fell silent and the hours passed, Helen stayed awake, alert to any signs from upstairs. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Susan is fine, she's just tired. Yes, that must be it. She tried to convince herself, seeking to justify her growing concern. But the calm was deceptive, and soon it was interrupted by muffled sounds of a heated argument. The arguments were hard to distinguish, but the tension in the voices was undeniable. This isn't right. What's going on up there? Helen questioned herself, her heart tightening with anxiety. She knew confrontations between Charles and Susan weren't uncommon, but something about the intensity of this argument alarmed her more than usual. Rising, Helen headed to the stairs, moving with a lightness that only years of silent navigation through the mansion could provide. I'll just check, just to make sure Susan is okay, she justified her act of spying, the concern for Susan justifying her boldness in defying the unspoken rules of the house about privacy and hierarchy. As she approached Susan's room, the sound of crying became clearer, more desperate, cutting through Helen's heart. Oh, Susan, what can I do to help? How can I protect you if I can't even fully understand what you're facing? Helen wrestled internally, torn between the urgency to intervene and the awareness of her limitations as a maid. Standing in front of Susan's bedroom door, Helen hesitated. If I go in now, what will Charles say? And Susan, how would she feel knowing I heard? But how can I just ignore this crying, these raised voices in anguish? Helen grappled with her sense of duty and her protective instinct, an internal battle that reflected the turmoil on the other side of the door. Outside Susan's room, Helen felt each word like a blade, her heart tightening with each phrase she could discern through the door. The argument that initially seemed muffled and indistinct began to reveal itself in all its harshness and severity. I can't take this anymore, Dad. I've had enough. I don't want to be a model. I don't like it. Never did and never will. Susan's voice was laden with despair and frustration, breaking the barrier Charles tried to impose with his authority. You don't understand, Susan. This is for your own good. The rehearsals, the shows, the diets, all of this is necessary. You need this to be someone, to have a future. Charles's voice, powerful and definitive, cut through the air, his words sounding more like orders than fatherly advice. But I'm unhappy, Dad. This is killing me inside. It's not the life I want, but you've been pushing this on me for a long time and I'm tired, Susan cried, her voice choked with tears, a living testament to the pain she felt, not just physically but emotionally and psychologically. Charles, however, seemed unwilling to yield or even listen. If you don't follow what I'm saying, I'll have to take more drastic measures. I'll further reduce your food intake, cut off any contact with the outside world. You need to learn discipline, Susan, even if I have to force you to do it. Charles's words were cold, calculated, revealing a disturbing detachment from his own daughter's well-being. You can't do this to me. This is abuse, Dad. I wish Mom were here. She would never have allowed this. Susan's final cry was a mix of defiance and plea, a desperate appeal for a different life, for a reality where her voice was heard and her pain acknowledged. Helen, outside, could hardly believe what she was hearing. Charles's words, Susan's pleas, all painted a picture of abuse and suffering she could no longer ignore. This can't go on. I have to do something, she thought, the decision growing in her heart like a flame. Driven by a sense of urgency that surpassed any fear or hesitation, Helen ran down the stairs, her steps echoing through the quiet house. She knew what she was about to do could change everything, but the awareness of Susan's suffering gave her the courage she needed. Reaching the house's landline phone, Helen dialed the numbers with trembling yet determined hands. "Police, please! It's an emergency," she said as soon as the call was answered, her voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. Helen knew that by making this call she was crossing a threshold from which there was no return, but the conviction that she was doing the right thing to protect Susan gave her the strength to go on. As she held the phone, Helen took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "I need help. There's a situation here where I believe a child is in danger. Please send a patrol car quickly," she stated, her voice a mix of urgency and concern. "What exactly is going on, ma'am? We need more information before we can send one of our units. If you could provide details, we would be extremely grateful for your cooperation." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but clearly interested in the details Helen could provide. "It's the daughter of the house owner. He's being very strict with her. forcing her into a career she doesn't want, controlling what she eats, how she lives. I heard a very intense argument just now, threats. I just think someone needs to come here and check, Helen explained, each word laden with a weight she felt deeply. Understood, ma'am. We'll send a team right away. Stay safe and try not to intervene until we arrive, okay? I need you to stay at this location if possible. The voice offered not just instructions but also a certain comfort, a promise that help was on the way. Helen hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. She knew she had done the right thing, but the wait for the next 30 minutes would be torturous. Every second seemed to stretch infinitely as she pondered the possible consequences of her action. When the police finally arrived, Helen greeted them at the entrance. "Please come in. It's about Mr. Moore and his daughter Susan. I've been feeling for a while that I needed to talk to someone about what's happening, and you will be that someone," she said, guiding them inside with a silent urgency. One of the officers, a man with a firm posture and understanding eyes, asked to speak with Charles. "Mr. Moore, we need to talk about some concerns raised by your maid regarding your treatment of your daughter," he said, in a voice that left no room for refusal. As Charles went to meet the officers, his expression was a mix of surprise and irritation. He had no idea what awaited him, though deep down he might have suspected. Helen watched from a distance, hoping that Susan would finally receive the help she so desperately needed. In her room, isolated from the commotion unfolding downstairs, Susan allowed herself to dive into happier memories, times that seemed to belong to another world. She remembered a specific day with her mother Dorothy before the separation, a day that remained bright in her memory like a beacon of love and freedom. After the tense interaction with Charles Moore, the officers requested Helen's presence for a brief statement. With a heavy heart, she walked over to them, hoping her words could make a difference, that her concern for Susan would be enough to trigger a change. "Officers, I just want the best for Susan. She is a sweet, intelligent girl who is being forced to live a life she didn't choose," Helen explained, the words flowing from a place of love and desperation. One of the officers, with a sympathetic look, nodded, understanding the delicate situation. "We understand your concern and we will document everything you said, but without concrete evidence or the child's statement confirming these allegations, our ability to intervene is limited," he said, his voice carrying a professional lament for the impotence of the law in certain situations. Although Helen had expected this outcome on some level, she felt a wave of desolation hearing the officer's words. "So, there's nothing you can do at this moment, is that what you're telling me?" she asked, holding on tightly to the last spark of hope. "For now, no, but we are here if the situation changes, if another witness comes forward, if there is some really concrete evidence. We are taking Charles to the station for a statement, but he will be released soon if there's no trial," the other officer added, leaving the sentence unfinished, a tacit invitation to keep the lines of communication open. Returning inside, Helen found Susan, who was anxiously awaiting news. With a sigh that carried the weight of the world, Helen spoke. "Susan, they said they can't do anything. My statement, being just the maid, isn't enough, and without proof there's not much we can do." Her voice faltered, the words as difficult to say as they were to accept. Susan, whose eyes were already filled with tears, simply broke down, the reality of the situation enveloping her like a cold, dense fog. "So we are alone in this," she murmured, more to herself than to Helen. Together they spent the rest of the night in somber silence, the shared sadness forming an even stronger bond between them, despite the despair. The night hadn't yet ended when Charles Moore returned from the police station. His expression was one of contained fury, and without a word he turned to Helen. "You are fired. Pack your things and leave my house," he said, his voice as cutting as the cold wind beginning to blow outside. Helen, though shocked by the sudden decision, knew that her attempt to help Susan had sealed her fate in that house. With tears in her eyes but her dignity intact, she gathered her belongings, each piece a reminder of the years dedicated to that family, now ended by an act of courage. As Charles ruthlessly threw her bags outside into the falling rain, Helen felt the night's chill mix with the cold in her heart. "I'm sorry, Susan. I promise I'll do what I can from out here for you," she said, a final whispered farewell to the girl who had become so dear to her. Walking away from the Moore mansion under the rain that washed the streets but not the weight of her sadness, Helen wondered about the future, about what would become of Susan. And as the distance between her and the mansion grew, Helen carried with her the hope that somehow Susan would find her way to happiness, away from the shadows of an imposed destiny. After a turbulent night, Helen found refuge in her small apartment, located a short distance from the Moore mansion. The space, though modest, offered a quiet comfort, a welcome contrast to the tension that had marked her last hours under the same roof as Charles and Susan. As she lay down, the exhaustion of the day enveloped her, but her mind refused to rest. Instead, she planned, pondered what she could do next, how she could somehow make a difference in Susan's life. The idea of contacting Dorothy, Susan's mother, emerged like a flash of hope in the darkness. Maybe Dorothy can do something. Maybe she doesn't know how much Susan is suffering, Helen thought, turning in bed, her determination growing with the first rays of light seeping through the curtains. At dawn, Helen rose with renewed purpose. Rummaging through her things for Dorothy's address, she finally found the crumpled piece of paper in the pocket of dirty pants, a reminder of quieter days when the prospect of contacting Dorothy seemed unnecessary, a precaution for a scenario Helen hoped never to face. Armed with the address and a heart heavy with worry but light with hope, Helen hailed a taxi. The journey to the neighboring city where Dorothy lived was marked by an acute anxiety, each mile traveled bringing her closer to a confrontation she hoped could change the course of Susan's future. Dorothy's house, when it finally came into view, was exactly as Helen had imagined from Susan's descriptions. Large, yes, but of an older and modest model, simple. There was a tranquil beauty in the structure, a charm that spoke of stories and lives lived within its walls. Stepping out of the taxi, Helen approached the entrance, her heart pounding in her chest. Is this right? Am I doing the right thing? She wondered, doubting her decision for a moment. But then she remembered Susan, her crying, her pain, and any hesitation dissipated. For Susan, she whispered to herself, a mantra that gave her strength. Standing before Dorothy's door, Helen took a deep breath, trying to gather her courage. She knew the next few hours could very well define Susan's future, and the gravity of that thought weighed on her like never before. With a trembling hand, Helen raised her arm and knocked on the door, each knock echoing not only through the old wood but through her own heart. After a few moments of palpable anticipation, the door opened, revealing Dorothy. The expression of surprise on her face gave way to cautious curiosity upon seeing Helen, an almost stranger at her door. "Can I help you?" Dorothy asked, her voice soft, echoing the sweetness of her disposition despite the uncertainty shadowing her eyes. "My name is Helen. I used to work for Charles, Susan's father. I need to talk to you about your daughter. It's very important. It can't wait another second. I believe she may be in danger," Helen began, her voice firm but laden with an urgency that left no doubt about the seriousness of her visit. Dorothy stepped back, making room for Helen to enter. "Please, come in. What happened to Susan?" The concern immediately tinged her words as she led Helen to the living room. The simplicity and warmth of the home's interior formed a stark contrast to the coldness of the Moore mansion, reflecting the fundamental difference between Dorothy and Charles. Sitting across from Dorothy, Helen took a deep breath before starting. "Susan is suffering, Dorothy. Charles is forcing her into a modeling career, something she clearly hates. She is being controlled in every aspect of her life, from what she eats to whom she can talk to. I heard an argument last night. He threatened to cut her food intake even more, among other things. Susan is desperate," Helen reported, each word reinforced by conviction and concern. Tears welled up in Dorothy's eyes as she listened. "I knew Charles was strict, but this is too much. I always feared Susan would end up trapped in that world Charles idealized for her. But I never imagined it was this severe," Dorothy said, the pain of not having been there for her daughter evident in every syllable. Helen held Dorothy's hand, seeking to offer some comfort. "I know it's hard, but I believe that together we can do right by Susan. Your voice, as her mother, has power. If you're willing to speak up to give your testimony about Charles, we can protect Susan," Helen affirmed, her gaze meeting Dorothy's with unshakable determination. Dorothy, though still clearly shaken by the situation, nodded, a resolution firming in her eyes. "You're right, Helen. I would do anything to protect my daughter, to get her out of this situation. I'll give my testimony about what I've experienced at the hands of that man. I'll do whatever it takes," Dorothy said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, the natural sweetness of her personality now tempered with the courage of a mother determined to fight for her daughter. Without wasting time, Dorothy picked up the phone, dialing the number of the police station in Charles's city. "Hello, my name is Dorothy. I am the mother of Susan Moore. I would like to schedule a time to give a statement about my daughter's father, Charles Moore. It is an urgent matter," she explained when the call was answered, each word pronounced with a clarity that left little room for doubt about her intent. After the decisive conversations at Dorothy's house, they headed to the police station in Charles's city, filled with a mix of anxiety and determination. Meanwhile, in a moment of growing desperation, Charles Moore faced the possibility of losing control over the situation and, most importantly, over Susan. Alone in his office, Charles thought about the recent turn of events. If Dorothy finds out about this and decides to fight for Susan's custody, if the police start to believe these absurd accusations, I can't let that happen. Susan is my responsibility, my daughter. I know what's best for her, he thought, convincing himself that his actions, no matter how extreme, were justified. The idea of fleeing began to take shape in his mind, a drastic solution to a growing problem. If we simply disappear for a while until this calms down, yes, that could work, Charles concluded, the twisted logic of his plans reflecting the whirlwind of emotions consuming him. Without wasting time, Charles found Susan, telling her they needed to take a sudden trip. "It's for your own good, Susan. Trust me and don't ask questions. I'm your father, and I just want to see you well," he insisted, guiding his reluctant and confused daughter to the car. At the police station, Dorothy was preparing to give her testimony, each word carefully considered but firm. "Charles has always been controlling, but I never imagined it would come to this with our daughter. Susan doesn't deserve to live like this, under constant pressure and unhappiness. She deserves to be free to choose her own path," Dorothy explained to the officers, her voice carrying a mix of pain and determination. The officers listened attentively, noting every detail. "Your testimony could make all the difference, Dorothy. We'll do everything in our power to ensure Susan's safety," one of them assured her, recognizing the courage Dorothy showed in confronting the situation. Soon, a patrol was sent to Charles's house, but they didn't find him there. Suspecting he might be fleeing, they took to the city streets, and the patrol car spotted a vehicle matching the description of Charles's car. Cautiously, the officers began to follow, maintaining a safe distance but keeping a close eye on any suspicious movements. Inside the car, Susan felt a mix of fear and confusion. "Where are we going, Dad? What's happening? I just want an explanation for why we're leaving the city so suddenly," she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Everything is under control, Susan. We just need some time away from all this until things calm down," Charles responded, trying to maintain his composure, though his mind was in turmoil, thinking about the consequences of his actions and how they might anger Susan's mother. The careful police pursuit continued. At one point, the patrol car turned on its siren and forced Charles to a stop, with the officers approaching his vehicle cautiously. "Mr. Moore, please step out of the car with your hands where we can see them," an officer instructed, his authoritative voice cutting through the tension of the moment. As Charles was led out of the car by the police, his face reflected a mix of emotions, primarily a silent desperation at losing control of the situation. "This can't be happening. Everything I did was for Susan's future," he thought, his internal justifications clashing with the reality of his actions finally being confronted. Susan, separated from her father and taken in a different police car, was immersed in her own tumultuous thoughts. "What's going to happen now? Does this mean things will change? I just wish Mom were here," she reflected. Upon arriving at the police station and seeing Dorothy and Helen, Susan could hardly contain the flood of emotions overwhelming her. She ran toward them, her words tumbling out as she tried to express everything she felt. "Mom, Helen, I was so scared. I didn't know if you would know what happened to me. I didn't know if I would see you again," Susan said, relief and gratitude overflowing in every word. Dorothy, with tears in her eyes, responded with a voice choked with emotion. "Susan, my dear, I'm so sorry for everything you had to go through, but you're safe now. We will take care of you. We will make sure everything is resolved," she promised, reaffirming her commitment not just as a mother but as a protector. An officer approached them, ready to explain the situation. "Ladies, I want you to know that Charles Moore has been arrested on several serious charges, including emotional abuse and neglect. Your testimony, along with the evidence we've gathered, was crucial in ensuring we could take this action, he explained, detailing the legal procedures that would follow and emphasizing the seriousness of the charges against Charles. Helen, hearing the officer's words, felt a complex mix of relief and sadness. "Susan, this means you won't have to go back to that house, to that life. We will find a way to rebuild, to make you feel safe and loved again," she said, her determination to support Susan as unwavering as ever. Susan, hugged by her mother and Helen, finally allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. "Maybe now I can have the chance to just be me," she thought, the idea of a fresh start, free from the shadows of the past beginning to form in her mind. As the officer stepped away, Dorothy turned her attention to Helen, a grateful sparkle and an idea forming in her eyes. "Helen, you are now without a job for doing what was right for Susan. I was thinking, I would love to experience someone else's cooking for a while. Would you consider coming to work with me at my house? I know Susan would love to have you around," Dorothy said with a smile. Helen, surprised and touched by the offer, couldn't help but smile broadly. "I would be honored, Dorothy. Nothing would make me happier than to continue being a part of Susan's life, and now yours too," she replied, the joy and relief at having a path forward radiating from her. Susan, hearing the exchange between the two, felt her heart warm with the prospect of having Helen close, of starting her new life with so much love and support. "This is going to be amazing. Helen makes the best cakes," she exclaimed, her voice reflecting the happiness she felt as everything was falling into place so well. 2 months had passed since that day at the police station, and life at Dorothy's house had transformed into a haven of peace and new beginnings. On a typical day, the house was filled with laughter and conversations, a stark contrast to the dark days of Susan's past. "Mom, Helen, I got a high grade on my essay about what is happiness." Susan shared during breakfast, her enthusiasm evident. "I wrote about finding happiness in the little things like having my mom and Helen around." Dorothy smiled, exchanging a knowing look with Helen. "That's wonderful, Susan. We are so proud of you. Seeing you happy is our greatest happiness." "I love you so much, my daughter," Dorothy said, grateful for the harmony that now filled her home. Meanwhile, far away in jail, Charles Moore spent his days brooding over the situation, his anger and resentment growing inside him. "They will see. They don't know what they did," he thought, unable to find remorse for his actions, even as he faced many years behind bars. Back at Dorothy's house, life continued with a new rhythm, a rhythm of healing, love, and rebuilding. "You know, I never imagined we could be so well after everything," Helen reflected as she helped Susan with her homework. "And I never imagined I would have the chance to be simply happy again. But here we are, me, my mom, and you, my best friend," Susan replied, a genuine smile on her face, the gratitude for her new life and the constant presence of Dorothy and Helen illuminating her days. And so, amidst laughter, learning, and shared moments, the story of Susan, Dorothy, and Helen continued, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the human capacity to start anew, with justice that, although it had taken some time, brought peace to their lives. You've reached the end of another story. We invite you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support motivates us to keep posting exciting narratives almost daily. Don't forget to watch the video that is about to appear on your screen. See you there.
My name is Renee Johnson. I'm a 65-year-old single mother living in Tampa, Florida. I've been living alone since I lost my husband, George, 2 years ago. Our 35-year marriage was happy with hardly any arguments. But the loneliness after losing him has been a heavy burden for me. I have 2 children, my son Michael and my daughter Ren. They're both married and independent. Michael lives out of state, so I don't see him often. But Ren and my 5-year-old granddaughter, Ray, live just a 10-minute drive away and visit frequently. Ray is as cute as a doll, with fair skin and big eyes. She looks just like Ren did when she was little. Ren's husband, Kyle, is a teacher at the local high school. He's 10 years older than Ren and apparently popular with the female students due to his movie star looks. I was awakened around 2 a.m. by the sudden sound of a FaceTime call. On the screen was my granddaughter Ray's face, looking like she was about to cry. "Ray, what's wrong, calling so late?" I asked, still groggy. "Grandma, Mommy says the baby's coming. Help." Ray's voice was trembling. I was instantly wide awake. "What? Already? There should still be over a month to go. Where's your dad?" Tears welled up in Ray's eyes. He kicked Mommy's tummy and left." My heart froze. "I understand, Ray. I'll be right there. What should I tell Mommy?" "Mommy says it hurts." Ray's voice trailed off. "Okay. Ray, you're a brave girl. Stay with Mommy. Grandma will be there soon." After hanging up, I hurriedly started changing clothes. My mind was in chaos, but I knew I had to act fast. I picked up my smartphone and opened the Uber app. Thankfully, despite the late hour, there was a car nearby. "Are you in a hurry?" came a message from the driver. I replied, "Yes, it's an emergency." While waiting, I tried calling Ren several times, but there was no answer. I tried Kyle too, but couldn't get through. 5 minutes later, the Uber arrived. "Good evening," the driver said, but I just nodded slightly and jumped into the back seat. "You seem to be in a hurry," the driver said. "Yes, my daughter." I choked on my words. There was no time to explain. "Please, just hurry." The car made its way through the quiet residential area. As the streetlights cast their orange glow, my anxiety continued to grow. Was Ren okay? The baby? And Kyle? 15 minutes later, we finally arrived at Ren's house. "Thank you," I said, and quickly got out of the car. I rushed to the front door and knocked. "Ray! Run! Open up! It's Grandma." No answer. With growing anxiety, I put my hand on the doorknob. The door was open. I entered without hesitation. "Ray! Run!" I called out as I made my way down the dark hallway. When I entered the living room, I gasped at the sight before me. Ren was lying on the floor. Her face was pale, with cold sweat on her forehead. Ray was holding her mother's hand, sobbing. "Run! Are you okay?" I rushed to my daughter's side. Ren answered in a weak voice, her face contorted with pain. "Mom, the baby, it hurts." I put my hand on Ren's forehead. She didn't seem to have a fever, but she was clearly unwell. "I'll call an ambulance." I took out my smartphone and dialed 911. The operator's voice came through. 911, what's your emergency?" "My daughter is 8 months pregnant and in pain. There's a possibility of premature labor," I explained as calmly as I could. "Understood. We're dispatching an ambulance right away. Can you give me your location?" I gave them Ren's address. The operator explained what to do until the paramedics arrived. After hanging up, Ray clung to me. "Grandma, is Mommy going to be okay?" "It'll be all right, Ray. The doctors will be here soon," I said, hugging my granddaughter. Ren was breathing with difficulty. "Mom, Kyle, Yee. Don't think about that now." I held my daughter's hand. "Just focus on the baby and your body." A few minutes later, we heard the sound of sirens. I opened the front door to guide the paramedics inside. The paramedics quickly began assessing Ren's condition. "Her blood pressure is a bit high. The fetal heartbeat is unstable," one of them said. "We need to transport her to the hospital," another told me. "Will you come with us?" "Yes, of course," I answered. "I'm bringing Ray too." Ren was placed on a stretcher and loaded into the ambulance. Ray and I climbed into the back seat. As the ambulance started moving, one of the paramedics asked Ren, "Ma'am, when did the pain start?" Ren answered weakly, "This morning, but it got really bad in the evening." "Any idea what might have caused it? Did you fall or bump into something?" Ren hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. I didn't miss the change in her expression. The ambulance sped towards the hospital. I held Ray close, staring out the window. The streetlights were passing by in a blur. "Grandma, is Mommy going to be okay?" Ray asked anxiously. "She'll be fine," I answered, but I couldn't be certain of my own words. 15 minutes later, we arrived at the hospital. Ren was immediately taken to the obstetrics emergency room. Ray and I were told to wait in the waiting area. "Your daughter's condition is critical. There's a high possibility of premature birth," the doctor told me. "We'll do everything we can, but please be prepared." I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. Ray held my hand. "Grandma, I'm scared." "It's okay, Ray," I hugged my granddaughter. "We need to be strong for Mommy." The clock in the waiting room ticked slowly. I spent the long night praying for my daughter's safety and worrying about the future of my grandchildren. It was past 3 a.m. when a nurse finally came to us. "Mrs. Johnson, your daughter is still undergoing tests. We'll need you to wait a bit longer." I nodded with a worried expression. "I understand. Thank you." After the nurse left, I turned to Ray. My granddaughter was curled up on the sofa, looking exhausted. "Ray, can we talk for a bit?" I gently asked. Ray nodded slightly. I sat next to her and put my arm around her. "Ray, can you tell me a bit more about what happened tonight? About your dad too." Ray began speaking in a trembling voice. "Daddy, he's been fighting with Mommy a lot lately. Today too." "And then?" I prompted. "Daddy came home, and he was really angry. He had a big fight with Mommy." Tears welled up in Ray's eyes. "Then Daddy kicked Mommy's tummy." I felt my chest tighten. "Did your dad kick Mommy's stomach?" Ray nodded, crying. "Mommy said it hurt, but Daddy just left. I hugged my granddaughter. Ray, thank you for telling me. You're a brave girl. After comforting Ray for a while, she fell asleep from exhaustion. I took out Ren's cell phone. She had given me the passcode for emergencies. When I opened the phone, there were no recent calls from Kyle. Instead, a name, Jessica, appeared multiple times. Checking the SMS, I was horrified by the messages I saw. Don't come tonight. You're a noisy woman. If you need money, just say so. But I don't want to hear about the baby anymore. How many times do I have to tell you to get a divorce? My hands were shaking. Was this the situation my daughter had been in? Why hadn't I noticed? Opening the photo folder, I found several pictures of bruises and injuries on Ren's body. The dates spanned the past few months. I felt sick to my stomach. I put the cell phone back in my pocket and took a deep breath. I tried calling Kyle, but again there was no answer. I left a message on his voicemail. Kyle, it's Renee. Ren's been hospitalized. Contact me immediately. At that moment, I remembered something from a few weeks ago. Ren's best friend, Samantha, had approached me with a worried look. Mrs. Johnson, I'm worried about Ren, Samantha had said hesitantly. What do you mean? Kyle, he's been acting strange lately. I've seen him with the new English teacher a lot. Are you suspecting an affair? I can't say for sure. I tried to talk to Ren about it, but she didn't want to believe it. Back in the present, I let out a deep sigh. I should have taken it more seriously then. The nurse approached again. Mrs. Johnson, your daughter's tests are finished. The doctor would like to speak with you. I stood up. I understand. I gently woke Ray, and we headed to the consultation room. The doctor greeted us with a serious expression. Mrs. Johnson, I'll explain the situation. Ren is currently in a state of threatened premature labor. The fetus is also showing signs of distress. I gasped. What does that mean? We've found multiple bruises on Ren's body, especially around her abdomen. The doctor was choosing his words carefully. This suggests the possibility of domestic violence. I closed my eyes. My worst fears had been confirmed. We're currently working to stabilize Ren and the fetus. However, depending on the situation, we may need to consider an emergency C-section. I understand, I answered in a shaky voice. Can I see my daughter? Yes, for a short time. As we left the consultation room, Ray looked up at me with anxious eyes. Grandma, is Mommy okay? I hugged my granddaughter. Mommy is fighting hard. We need to be strong too. When we entered Ren's hospital room, my daughter was lying there weakly. I took her hand. Ren, are you okay? Ren nodded slightly. Mom. I'm worried about the baby. The doctors are doing their best, I tried to reassure her. Ren, what happened? Tell me the truth. Tears welled up in Ren's eyes. Kyle. At that moment, Ren's expression contorted in pain. It hurts, she cried out. Alarms went off, and nurses rushed into the room. Please wait outside, a nurse ushered us out of the room. Just before the door closed, I heard the doctor's voice. Prepare for an emergency C-section. I held Ray close, waiting with a prayerful heart. As anger towards Kyle and worry for Ren mixed together, the sun was beginning to rise. In front of the operating room, Ray and I waited with bated breath. The morning sun was beginning to shine through the hallway windows, casting a warm light on the hospital's white walls. However, even this light couldn't ease our anxiety. Grandma, is Mommy going to be okay? Ray asked in a small voice. I hugged my granddaughter and answered, Your mom is strong. She'll be fine. Even as I said this, my heart was filled with worry. Kyle's violence, Ren's suffering, and the emergency C-section happening at this very moment. It all felt so sudden, so unreal. After 2 hours, the operating room door finally opened. The doctor approached us with a tired expression. Mrs. Johnson, he said. Yes, I stood up. My daughter. The baby. The doctor took a deep breath and said, the baby was born safely. However, due to being premature, we've taken her to the neonatal intensive care unit. A moment of relief. But the doctor's expression suggested there was more to come. However, Ren's condition is extremely critical. We can't stop the bleeding. My mind went blank. Can I see Ren? Yes, but time is limited. I took Ray's hand and headed to the ICU. Ren was lying there, surrounded by numerous machines, her face pale. Ren. I took my daughter's hand. Ren slowly opened her eyes. Mom, the baby. She's safe. A beautiful little girl, just like you, I answered, holding back tears. A look of relief passed over Ren's face. That's good. Ray is here too. I brought Ray closer. Mama. Ray cried out. Ray. Mama's treasure, Ren smiled weakly. Mama loves you, so much. Ray held Ren's hand, crying. Ren looked at me and said in a faint voice, Mom, please. Take care of Ray and the baby. I understand, I nodded. Don't worry. Ren closed her eyes, seemingly at peace. At that moment, the heart monitor began to sound. Run! Run! I cried out. Medical staff rushed in, and we were ushered out of the room. 30 minutes later, the doctor approached us with a sorrowful expression. My deepest condolences, he said. With those words, my world crumbled. Amidst our grief, a nurse guided us to the NICU. In a small incubator, the newborn baby was sleeping. She's a very strong girl, the nurse said. But we'll need to keep her here for observation for a while. I placed my hand on the incubator, feeling the heartbeat of this tiny life. Your mama loved you very much, I said. Ray stood next to me, peering into the incubator. "Grandma, is this my sister?" "Yes, Ray. This is your beautiful little sister." At that moment, I made a decision. To fulfill Ren's last wish, would protect these children with all my might. After leaving the NICU, I headed to the hospital chapel. There, I sat for a long time, praying. Praying for Ren's soul, worrying about the future of my grandchildren, and asking for strength for myself. When I left the chapel, the sun had fully risen. The start of a new day. But our lives had changed dramatically. I took out my cell phone and saw several missed calls from Kyle. How should I confront him? Should I report him to the police? Various thoughts raced through my mind. But now, I had to prioritize Ray, who was right in front of me, and the baby fighting for her life in the NICU. Taking a deep breath, I began walking down the hospital hallway. Amidst a mixture of grief and determination, I was about to take the first step into a new life. 3 days had passed since Ren's funeral. I was going back and forth between the hospital and home, taking care of the baby in the NICU and looking after Ray. In the midst of these grief-stricken days, I finally received a call from Kyle. "I'm coming to the hospital now. We need to talk about the baby." His cold voice filled me with anger. However, I needed to remain calm. I was waiting for Kyle in the hospital lobby. When he appeared, I gasped. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and he reeked of alcohol. "Kyle," I called out quietly. He ignored me and headed towards the reception desk. "Where's Ren Johnson's baby?" he demanded. As the nurse looked confused, I intervened. "Kyle, let's talk first." He looked at me irritably. "What?" "Make it quick." We moved to the hospital courtyard. The soft morning sunlight felt incongruous with this heavy atmosphere. "Ren is gone," I said quietly. "Because you hurt her." Kyle grimaced. "Don't talk nonsense. She probably just tripped on her own." "Don't lie," my voice trembled. Ray saw everything. His expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly composed himself. "You can't trust what a child says." "Kyle, you were abusing Ren." "I have evidence." "What are you talking about?" He couldn't hide his panic. "It's all on Ren's cell phone. The photos, the messages." Kyle's face turned pale. However, he quickly turned aggressive. "That doesn't prove anything. I have parental rights. I'm taking the baby." "I won't let you," I said firmly. He sneered. "How do you plan to stop me?" At that moment, I made my decision. "I'm going to report this to the police. And I'll fight you in court." Kyle looked shaken for a moment, but then put on a defiant face. "Do what you want." He turned on his heel and quickly walked away. I took a deep breath and considered my next move. That afternoon, I visited a local domestic violence support center. It was a small building called Sunshine House. After explaining the situation at the reception, a counselor named Jane came to assist me. She greeted me with a warm smile. "Renee, you're in a difficult situation. But you're not alone," she said. Jane's words brought tears to my eyes. I realized I had been trying to handle everything on my own. "What should I do?" I asked. "First, let's report this to the police," Jane said. "Then, we'll get a lawyer and file for guardianship." Following Jane's instructions, I visited the police station that day. Detective Brown, the officer in charge, listened to my story seriously. "You say you have evidence." I handed over Wren's cell phone. "Everything is here." Detective Brown nodded. "We'll start an investigation. Kyle Anderson will be called in for questioning." Those words gave me a sense of relief. The next day, I met with lawyer Sarah Morris, whom Jane had recommended. "Renee, it might be a tough battle to gain custody of your grandchildren," Sarah said frankly. "I'm prepared," I replied. "Good," Sarah smiled. "Then let's start preparing the petition." The following weeks felt like being in the middle of a storm. Police investigations, meetings with the lawyer, and hospital visits. In between all that, I had to take care of Ray. Finally, the day of the initial hearing in family court arrived. As I entered the courtroom, I saw Kyle sitting with his lawyer. He was staring at me with cold eyes. The judge entered, and the hearing began. "Today, we are holding a hearing regarding the custody of Ray Anderson and the as-yet unnamed newborn," the judge announced. Sarah stood up and began explaining the situation. "The evidence of Kyle's abuse, the cause of Wren's death, and my willingness and ability to take in my grandchildren." Kyle's lawyer tried to argue, but the weight of the evidence was clear. As the hearing ended, the judge made a provisional decision. "At this point, I grant temporary custody to Renee Johnson. Kyle Anderson's visitation rights will be restricted." I let out a sigh of relief. This was just the beginning, but it was an important step. As we were leaving the courtroom, Kyle approached me. "This isn't over," he threatened in a low voice. I looked straight back at him. "You're right. But justice will prevail." That day, when I returned to the hospital, I looked at the baby sleeping in the NICU and made a vow. "Wren, I promise. I'll love and protect these children enough for both of us." The next morning, as I woke up with the sunrise, I felt a new determination in my heart. While making coffee in the kitchen, I glanced at the calendar. Today, our new life begins. I heard Hope crying, and Ray called out, "Grandma, Hope is awake." I smiled. Coming. Yes, this is our new normal. There will be challenges, but a future full of hope awaits us. The story of our new family begins here. My name is Linda Johnson. I woke up to the familiar sound of my alarm clock. The gentle chimes echoed through the cozy bedroom of our home in the suburbs of Springfield, Ohio. The soft morning light filtering through the floral curtains cast a warm glow on the faded wallpaper that had witnessed countless family memories over the years. I'm 55 years old, working part-time as a teacher while managing household chores. As I get out of bed and slip on my well-worn slippers, I think about the busy day ahead while going through my morning routine. On my way to the kitchen, I pause in front of my 14-year-old son Michael's room. I gently open the door to check on him, still sleeping. I'm secretly proud of the wonderful relationship we've built. He's hardly gone through the typical teenage rebellion and never causes trouble at school. While preparing breakfast, I think about my husband, Robert. He's 58 and currently away on a long business trip. Apparently, he's been assigned a big project, which has kept him away from home more often. We have fewer chances to talk on the phone, and I sometimes feel a bit lonely. But I remind myself that it's all for work. As the pleasant aroma of toasting bread fills the kitchen, I glance at the calendar. Noticing that Robert's expected return date is still far off, I let out a small sigh. I'm a little concerned that we're spending less time together as a family of 3. Michael appears in the kitchen with a sleepy face. "Good morning, Mom," he says as he sits at the table. As usual, we have breakfast together, chatting about school events and his friends. I deeply appreciate how precious these ordinary moments are. After breakfast, I see Michael off to school and start preparing for my own work. My part-time teaching job is rewarding, though sometimes challenging. But I'm determined to do my best for my family. Before leaving the house, I look at the family photo in the living room. The 3 of us smiling. But I realize we haven't taken a new picture in a while. Perhaps we've been spending less family time since Robert's work got busier. Feeling this slight unease, I leave the house without dwelling on it further. While driving, I think about today's lessons. Picturing my students' faces makes me a bit nervous. But my love for teaching helps ease that tension. Arriving at school, I exchange greetings with my colleagues. Everyone's kind, and it's a pleasant work environment. Yet, when I think about home, an indescribable anxiety flickers in my chest. Still, I need to focus on the task at hand. Taking a deep breath, I head to the classroom, feeling as if an unknown fate awaits me. After finishing the afternoon classes, I head home. It was another day encouraged by my students' smiles. While driving, I ponder dinner options. Should I make Michael's favorite lasagna, or go for a simple chicken salad? Lost in such ordinary thoughts, I park the car in our garage. I open the front door and call out, "I'm home." Naturally, there's no response. Michael should still be at school. As I put down my bag and start towards the kitchen, I hear footsteps rushing down the stairs. "Michael." I turn around in surprise to see my son standing before me. It's too early for him to be back from school. "Mom." There's an urgency in Michael's voice that I've never heard before. His face is pale, and sweat beads on his forehead. "What's wrong? What about school?" Michael interrupts my questions with a shout. "We need to run away right now." My heart leaps at those words. What? What happened? Michael, out of breath, tries to explain quickly. "It's about Dad." "Dad?" His words trail off. I place my hands on my son's shoulders, trying to calm him. It's okay, take your time. What happened? Michael takes a deep breath, seeming to calm down a bit. But fear still lingers in his eyes. Dad, we're in danger. I don't know the details, but I saw Dad's phone. Alarms go off in my head. Robert's phone. Danger. What's going on? Michael, calm down. What did you see on Dad's phone? My son hesitates, then pulls a smartphone from his pocket. Dad left this at home. And then, there were strange messages. I take the smartphone from Michael and look at the screen. Indeed, there are conversations with people we don't know. As I read the content, my hands start to shake. I'm at a loss for words. The content is unbelievable. Michael continues, Mom, it looks like Dad's involved in something bad. And we might be in danger too. I look into my son's face. His eyes reflect anxiety and fear, but also a strong determination. I understand. I take a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. First, let's calm down and you tell me everything in detail. We move to the living room and sit on the sofa. Michael clasps his hands on his knees and begins to tell me everything. The content of the messages he found on the phone, unsettling rumors he heard at school, and the recent changes in Robert's behavior. As I listen, various emotions swirl within me. Surprise, fear, and sadness. An unknown side of my husband of many years is being revealed. At the same time, I feel a strong need to handle this situation calmly. Michael, thank you for telling me all this. I hold my son's hand and smile encouragingly. You're very brave. Michael seems a little relieved, but tension still hasn't left him. Mom, what should we do? I think deeply. I need to make a calm judgment now. The safety of our family is the top priority. Well, I choose my words carefully. First, it might be dangerous to stay here. But it's not good to move hastily either. I stand up and look out the window. The view of the quiet residential area remains unchanged. However, I can't help but sense the danger lurking within this tranquility. Michael, let's pack our bags. Just the essentials. I make my decision. And I'll contact my friend Sarah. We can trust her. My son nods silently. His eyes reflect anxiety but also trust in me. It's going to be okay. We'll get through this together. I say firmly. However, anxiety swirls in my heart. What will become of us now? And Robert, what on earth are you doing? Michael and I started packing our essentials hurriedly. All the while, I couldn't get the content of my son's story out of my head. Hey, Michael, I asked carefully, choosing my words. Can you tell me more about the messages you saw on Dad's phone? Michael stopped packing and took a deep breath. Yes. He began hesitantly. It looked like Dad was making some kind of deal with someone. There was talk about money and documents. My heart raced. A deal? What kind of deal? I'm not sure, but... Michael furrowed his brow. It seemed like he was trying to sell confidential company information. I gasped at those words. Robert, doing such a thing. It's unbelievable. But thinking back on his recent behavior, something had definitely been off. Anything else that bothered you? I asked, trying to maintain my composure. Michael thought for a moment before answering. Dad's been talking on the phone a lot lately in a hushed voice. He'd hang up in a hurry when I got close. Come to think of it, I had noticed that too. But I had convinced myself it was just work secrets. Now, it all makes sense. The increase in long business trips, less time with family, and the occasional uneasy demeanor he showed. Mom, has Dad turned into a bad person? Michael's voice trembled. I hugged my son. No, that's not it. There must be some circumstances we don't know about. But right now, our safety is the most important thing. As we continued packing, I looked around the house. Is there any clue? My eyes fell on the bookshelf in the study. Wait a minute, I went to the bookshelf and pulled out an old album. As I flipped through the pages, photos of our happy times were lined up. But there were no recent photos. Then, a piece of paper slipped out from the back of the album. This is... I exclaimed in surprise. It was a bank statement. There were records of huge transactions I knew nothing about. Michael, come here, I called my son. Look at this. It seems Dad was hiding something big from us. Michael's eyes widened as he looked at the statement. Mom, does this mean? I exhaled deeply. Yes. The situation seems to be more serious than we thought. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Michael and I looked at each other, frozen. Who is it? Michael asked in a low voice. I don't know, I answered cautiously. But maybe. The doorbell rang again. We held our breath. Mom, what should we do? Michael's voice was shaking. I made a decision. We don't have time. Let's leave right now. Through the back door. We hurriedly finished packing the rest of our belongings and headed for the back door. As we did, I took one last look at our family photos. Memories of happier days. But now, we must face a new reality. Are you ready? I asked Michael. He nodded bravely. Yes, let's go. We quietly opened the back door and stepped outside. We don't know where we're heading yet. But we have each other. That's enough. I'll call Sarah, I said. She should be able to help us. Michael nodded silently. His eyes reflected anxiety but also strong determination. We quickly got into the car. As I started the engine, I looked back at the house one more time. The memories we built there, and the peaceful days now lost. But we must look forward. It's going to be okay, I told Michael. We'll get through this together. As I drove away, a sense of determination grew in my heart. This is the beginning of a new life. And the start of a journey to uncover the truth. After hanging up the phone with Sarah, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my heart. My friend was surprised but immediately offered to help. Now we have a temporary shelter secured. Michael, we're going to Sarah's place. Let's hurry with the preparations. My son nodded silently and continued packing. Watching him, I once again realized the gravity of our situation. The ordinary life we had just hours ago now seemed like a distant past. Suddenly, we heard the sound of a car. We froze. Mom, could it be? Michael's voice trembled. The car visible through the window was unmistakably Robert's. Hurry, I said in a low voice. Leave the luggage. We need to get out through the back door right now. Being careful not to make any noise, we headed for the back door. Just before opening it, we heard the front door open. Linda. Michael. Robert's voice echoed through the house. Michael and I looked at each other. Seeing the fear in my son's eyes, I steeled my resolve. Let's go. I took Michael's hand and we went out through the back door. We crossed the yard and came out to the back alley. Robert's voice was getting closer. Linda. Where are you? My heart was pounding. But we couldn't stop. We came out to the main street and hailed a taxi. Hurry, I told the driver as we got in. Take us as far as you can. Just as the car started moving, I saw Robert burst out of the alley. Linda. Wait. His voice gradually faded away. Michael looked back, but I kept facing forward. It's okay, I said with a shaky voice. We have our own path now. The taxi drove out of town and continued through unfamiliar scenery. Looking at the landscape flowing past the window, I reflected on my life so far. Our wedding day. The day Michael was born. The happy times we spent as a family. And the shocking truth revealed today. Everything was running through my mind like a fast-moving picture show. Mom, Michael's voice brought me back to reality. What's going to happen to us now? I squeezed my son's hand. I don't know. But if we're together, I'm sure we can overcome anything. The taxi entered the highway. The lights of the town behind us gradually grew smaller. It seemed to symbolize our farewell to our past. It's the beginning of a new life, I whispered. Michael nodded silently. In his eyes, I could see anxiety but also a glimmer of hope. The taxi continued driving through the darkness of the night. We don't know our destination. But what's certain is that we're here together. And we have a strong determination to protect each other. Hey, Michael, I said quietly. We'll understand about Dad someday. But for now, let's think about our future. Yes, Michael's voice had regained some strength. Looking at the scenery flowing past the window, I exhaled deeply. This is the path we've chosen. It might be difficult. But I'm proud that we had the courage to seek the truth and start a new life. The taxi's headlights cut through the darkness, carrying us towards an unknown future. We don't know what awaits us. But surely, a path will open up. As long as Michael and I walk together, supporting each other. Well, this is the beginning of our new life, I whispered, softly,